This series of conversations is brought to you in partnership with Brand South Africa and GCIS. We thank them for helping to build this channel. Spread the fire. Welcome back to SMWX, and today I'm very glad to be joined by a distinguished guest as we shift our focus from South African politics to wider questions about the African continent, its economic and geopolitical importance. We're joined by Professor David Monyae, who is the Director for the Center for Africa-China Relations at the University of Johannesburg. He is a storied academic and someone who's worked both in the private and public sectors and has various insights to share with us on Africa's place in the world right now and its value proposition. Prof Monyae, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being here.
Some say that Europe was the engine of global growth for a period. The United States and maybe China has taken that position now. And that next in line could be Africa. To what extent do you agree with that view?
Yeah, I think that has to do with the advancement of capitalism. By its very nature, it grows in the zones of underdevelopment. So it really depends how a region focus itself and take advantage on a number of key issues. When we look at Africa, why we believe in the statement you've just made, we look at key factors. One, it's the largest continent geographically. It's quite huge. And at times, I don't think our own people are aware how big the continent is.
Absolutely.
Number two, we are 1.3, 1.4 billion people. But what makes us different from other continents, with even larger population than us, say Asia, is that we are the youngest. Youngest in a contradictory way, youngest in terms of with the youngest number of young people coming up. So when you're talking about the fourth industrial revolution or use of digital economy or technology, the future consumers will be on the African continent. And therefore, for global companies, I think they look in terms of 10, 20, 50 years. I think the place that they look at is Africa. We also are fortunate enough that our continent is extremely rich, the soil. We have almost 60% of global fertile land unexplored. We have crises in terms of issues of climate change. We are affected. But by and large, I think we have so many advantages that if only we could have, firstly, unity on the continent, stability, and more importantly, beef up our education and compete with the rest of the world, there's no doubt we'll be a leading region in future.
Absolutely. And let's delve into some of those. The thing you first said just about the size of the continent and not understanding and appreciating the size. Can you tell us more about that? Because that's something that's always fascinated me when you actually see how big Africa is versus how it's mapped often.
It is quite huge. I think just to make very clear sense, it's just you having your today's China, United States, your India, Europe, would definitely fit into the continent.
Yeah.
From, I think, very simplistic way of looking at it. Large part of it a desert, but there's golden opportunity that even the desert is useful. I think you need a leadership that understands that we can do the best with what we have. We have also not just land. Underneath that land is massive mineral resources.
Yeah.
That if you follow history of the very same capitalism, the Berlin Conference, 1884-85, as a matter of fact, the Belgian king, one of his more exciting statement was that this continent is so huge. It's a cake, and I want a big chunk of that cake. And you know the entire history of the role of Belgium in Congo and so many other places. So we have people and are also a resource. And I do not think we appreciate the kind of knowledge and what we're capable should we have the right knowledge, skills to turn around a sense of hopelessness that at times we see in some parts of our continent, that we're able to turn around the current situation. We won't be the first one to do so. We saw the Japanese doing so. We've now seen the Chinese doing so. I think what we need to do is to learn and see exactly what are features of their own growth and development.
Absolutely.
Japanese, they just send students all over the world, acquire knowledge, and the Chinese are doing the same. If you look at the number of Chinese all over the world, and some of them do go back home and use the skills, but develop in a manner that is suitable to their environment. I think that's what we need. We need Africa that is in line with Agenda 2063. I think our leaders are trying. However, the AU itself has its own challenges. I think they've done pretty well in some areas, but disastrous in others in terms of how they're planning the future of the continent.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting that you mentioned we're living in this interesting moment in the continent's history where true independence is up for grabs, where there's more latitude than ever. I don't know how much to set economic policy, without being dictated to. Of course, there are geopolitical pressures always. And now the question is, where do we go from here as a continent? You mentioned other examples like Japan and China of places that came out of, in some ways, imperial pasts, but were able to transcend that and forge a path of independence. What do you think we can learn from that in this next period in our continent's history?
Let's look at China, an area that I've focused on for a while now. Whatever views one has on China,
sure.
Since 1949, I think we have seen a stable China, unified China. Whether the policies are good or bad, it depends with one's ideological perspective.
Sure.
But the ability to unite China for the very first time in its own history, from Mao to now, has allowed it to really go and stabilize other areas. So unity, stability as central. Then the right policies, particularly with the opening in 1978 up to now, we have seen that more effort was taken in terms of improving education, infrastructure, physical infrastructure on key areas, and have this planning that they do, 5-10 year plan, and phase out. And they start with agriculture and move into manufacturing and other areas. And I think with time, the record speaks for itself. They started performing extremely well, opening up the economy, inviting investors. So the Chinese economy has been foreign direct investment driven, but the productive forces, the people, workers, the skills, and central planning has assisted China to deal with poverty internally and also gain confidence on the global markets. And they've done it extremely well, being a hub of manufacturing, now entering into core areas, a domain for Western countries, which is high tech. It comes with its own challenges, as we see. The competition has reached that stage that we're talking of whether there's a new Cold War or not. But at the heart of it, the ability of Chinese to prioritize development, uplift people, and deal with other issues, environment. I think no doubt, they damage the environment, and they're now cleaning up and exercise. I think for us, China is not the answer, but some elements of what Chinese did could be suitable to our environment. And we shouldn't just look at China. We also need to look at what is it that we can learn from America, what can we learn from Japan, from Asia. Now I think there's a new phenomenon on our continent, that these Gulf states that are also making inroads, how, I think we need to ask questions. How did they make it? Small number, massive resources, oil in particular, but turn that and diversify and do extremely well in other areas. So I think we need to ask those questions. And lastly, I think on this for me would be the mere fact that we have 55 countries, fragmented, an element of disunity. I do not think we can compete with the bigger powers in this current form of nation states on the African continent. I think this is a huge debate that has been going on since 1963. Definitely. Can we? Let's look at South Africa, the leading economy, industrialized country. How many are we? 60 plus million people. We are small. We compared to China, Japan, or any United States or Europe, we're small and insignificant. However, if we can operate working at SADC level, working at AU level, I think we bring in big numbers, and we'll also resolve some of the challenges, not just South Africa's challenges, but the region and the continental.
Absolutely. One of the initiatives that has aimed to further draw African states together is the African Free Trade Agreement. Talk us through the importance of this in this overall project of trying to increase Africa's footprint in the global economy, and why do you think that's important?
When we look at the Africa's Free Trade Agreement that has been signed, firstly, for me, I think this is perhaps the greatest achievement ever made by African head of states and government since 1963, in my view. They haven't done well in other areas. Why do I say so? If we look since 1963, we realized that the continent wasn't trading among itself, among African nations. The percentage of intra-trade in Africa was at 16%. I think it has grown now to 23, 26%. If we compare that with Latin America, Asia, is that the other continents, they trade among themselves. 60% of their trade is among themselves as a region. So in our case, we tend to trade with external nations than ourselves. So I think that we end up also competing trade in raw materials, and therefore the entire trade is unfair, and we fail to close ranks and deal with a number of challenges that we face. What are those challenges? Movement of people on the continent. With all talk of Africa unity, continental integration, I do not think we're kind to each other as Africans. With these endless passports that people have to cross borders and detect tourism, for instance. A tourist coming to South Africa will have to have visas for other neighboring countries. I think we need to coordinate and ensure that anyone visiting will move freely. You don't just see the beauty in South Africa. You see Lesotho, Eswatini, Mozambique, Zimbabwe. It's an integrated so that we gain more resources. So to do that, it's not just a question of visas. We also need to look at other enablers. How is transport, the bottlenecks in terms of movement of people, peace and security? Are they safe when they move in our region? And therefore, I think you have to have electricity. We have a challenge in South Africa. If we had developed the Inga Dam in the DRC, will resolve some of the huge challenges at the continent. The lack of energy is not just a South African problem, it's continental. So you can't develop without energy. And therefore, the Inga Dam itself has been there since 1885, the talk of developing Inga Dam. And I just wonder why African leaders expect the outside world to develop that Inga Dam for them. I think you need political will, close-ring rank at SADC level and continental level to map up and invest in Inga as a region and ensure that the intake, the power from the Inga could get into SADC power grid and continental power grid to power development on the continent. Shortage of water. I do not think in next 10, 15 years, Johannesburg will be the same. I think if nothing is done in terms of piping water to this part of a region, we're going to have challenge as we face the energy challenge at the moment. We depend on Lesotho water, but that is not sufficient. And some are talking in terms of desalination, using water from the sea, turning it. It's very expensive. It's a good option. But the easiest way is to pipe water from Inga Dam, from Congo, up to here. So one would expect our leaders, not just South African leaders, the region, to plan collectively in dealing with those. So in a nutshell, these are some of the issues when we look a progress that is being made in terms of signing a free trade. It cannot operate on its own. You need other enablers and dealing with some of these challenges to ensure that any person in the rural area of South Africa, Lesotho, Zimbabwe, is able to get on the market faster, cheaper, without this hindrance, bureaucracy, either at the border or just lack of transportation.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, as you say that, it brings me to another guest we had on the channel, Professor Stephen Chan, who said that, concurred with you on a lot of the bottlenecks, but said that SADC needs to see itself as the potential next global superpower, or at least SADC has the capacity, if it is able to marshal that collective wisdom to really unify and then act collectively, economically, to really punch economically above its weight. And perhaps we don't see that as a global opportunity enough.
Oh, indeed. I agree fully with him. You have to have, and at times we're unfair to political leaders. I think it goes with us in the academia, the policymakers, civil society. I think we need to think far beyond short-termism, what I call short-termism, 5-year cycles. We need to think and map up strategies that last about 50 to 100 years. At the moment, I think you see the talk about fourth industrial revolution. And I always say the biggest challenge we have in this country and the continent, we tend to talk about this fourth industrial revolution. And we do it by declaration. We declare. And If you look at China and other nations, they talk less and they act, and then they explain after they've done it.
Right.
So here is what one would say. We look at the fourth industrial revolution. We look at where do we have comparative advantages, Africans, Southern Africa. The fourth industrial revolution will be powered on critical minerals, and we have them. What are those? You have your uranium, hydro, you have lithium, and we have those in abundance. All the material that is used for cell phones, it's from mainly Congo. In South Africa as well, we have quite a bit of some of this coal, including platinum and so many other minerals that are critical. But we're not hearing our civil society, academia, and political leadership thinking hard and say, one, how do we collectively have a protocol at SADC level? How do we close ranks and say we are not going to replicate the colonial era where these powers, whether it's China, Japan, or United States or EU, they come in, they mine, they take, and they beneficiate in their countries. So we're exporting jobs. So I think what we need to do is to close the rank. It shouldn't be just Zimbabwe doing that, or DRC and Zambia signing an agreement. And when you look at it, it's not really discussed at regional level. President Ramaphosa, in his State of the Nation, one of the things he said at the tail end of his speech was, in discussion with my counterparts, DRC and Congo, on the question of batteries, lithium batteries, and to find. I think that's a good start. We need to do that at a continental level. Ensure that these strategic minerals are not a source of conflict, are not exploited in a way that Africans are not benefiting. And therefore, I think we need to develop infrastructure, work with whoever is interested in these minerals, whether from the West or East, but lay out in a way that in the end, there's maximum benefit for Africans. But we go beyond that. What frustrates me is that we don't even know what we have in this strategic. We depend on expertise from Western world, Asia and others to come and map up for us. So you just think about it. I've never seen any nation that has developed depending on external people, regardless the goodwill that they might have. So there are key areas. You cannot develop without controlling your own security firstly. So we need to ask questions at AU level. Why does AU depend on external funding for its own security? 70 to 80% of peacekeeping on the continent, it's externally donors. We depend on donors. The very same Secretariat of the Free Trade, which is located in Ghana, at times you get a sense that we also depend on external donors to do research. How can you have people you're going to trade with assisting you to have a strategy? It confuses the hell out of me.
Negotiations,
Therefore, leadership is key, and we need to put pressure on our governments.
Because there has been warning of a new scramble for Africa if we don't think about this clearly and map our strategy early.
Indeed, you only do that by ensuring that we, with limited resources, that areas where we don't bring in external actors, we unite, we stop all these Anglophone and Francophone, and we concentrate on having a key strategic research, policy people, bureaucracy that can compete and understand what the other regions are doing. And therefore, we need to manage. So whether it's from east or west, manage them in a way that we don't take sides. We have been here before. Throughout the Cold War, there are a number of things that happened. I think it was quite clear United States and then Soviet Union would not enter into a direct fight because of nuclear. But therefore, they became enemies fighting it far away from their own places. And our continent was at the receiving end.
Absolutely.
This proxy war. And South Africa, apartheid South Africa played a role in that.
Sure.
And therefore, we need to avoid going back, whether over critical minerals or over any other issue. Unite the continent, be very clear, and keep our own peace.
What do you think are the intermediate steps towards greater African unity? Because you have said that economically, security-wise, politically, it's important for us not to continue to operate in these silos, and that we need to leverage our size. And of course, there's always been this long-term dream of African unity. What do you think are the next logical steps that can be taken to advance us towards that goal at a practical level?
I believe more in Kwame Nkrumah's the Big Bang approach. Unfortunately, it never worked. I think in 1963, there were two major arguments. One was for us to compete with the rest of the world, we need to have Big Bang independence and have one Africa, one government.
Right.
The likes of Julius Nyerere and others argued that I think it's a disaster. We cannot do a Big Bang approach. We rather do what we call your regional economic communities, your SADC, ECOWAS, East Africa, Maghreb, and the rest, Central Africa. And these gradualists won the day. However, we're battling to go back to practically, at a theoretical level, as a scholar, I am for Big Bang, but practically at times it's becoming a problem because the manner in which we developed, there's this uneven development, whether it's in SADC or at the continental level. And therefore, a Big Bang approach might be to the disadvantage of some, the zones of the developed zones. People move to those zones. It's natural. Even at a global level, we see most of our people try to get into Europe, dying in the Mediterranean, which is sad. And we need to have a much more gradual certain issues such as a common passport, deal with African diaspora, concentrate on peace and security, and ensure that it's a shared kind of development. At a SADC level, we can all be selling bananas, and of course, it's important too. But if we compete over bananas, we need to go to second phase. To what extent can we have industries, and which countries can lead in what areas, so that South Africa does not compete with Lesotho on certain areas. And in that way, I think easing up some of these borders, I think it will help us a great deal. But politicians, this debate has been weaponized globally. There's a rise of fascism in Europe, in the United States, over the very same issue. And I think we've seen even among our politicians, fascism is on the rise, and that these were anti-fellow Africans. And it's sad that we'll never develop if we don't unite and deal with this colonial mindset that there are these units that created by colonial powers, and therefore thinking that we will develop individually as countries instead of a region.
Let's come to some global trends, because you've been an interesting observer in terms of how some of the global trends that we see affect the continent itself. There's been talk of this new Cold War to which you've alluded. How does Africa position itself optimally in the new global environment where we see potential new rivals to the United States to one extent or another?
I think the very first thing is for us to understand what's going on. We tend to follow the Western narratives around this issue without creating our own narrative. I think, put it simply, what's happening at a global level, we see this major shift, major trends. What are those trends? The end of a unipolar, with the end of the Cold War, I think we've seen a decline of the US itself and the G7 countries. In real terms, their economic power, their standing, political power, their influence. We also have seen challenges that are coming within multilateral structures, United Nations being the prime, where agreements are not reached. And we have been here before. The League of Nations died a natural death because of more or less same kind of squabbles. And therefore, we also have seen the rise of a US and Western world entering Iraq, Syria, Libya, Afghanistan, and the crisis in the Middle East, and a number of countries, other countries on our continent. And in all these conflicts, we don't see a clear win either by the West or those countries, a stalemate of some sort. On the other hand, we also have seen the rise of China in particular in terms of economy, being the second largest economy, as well as the resurgence of Russia trying to reassert itself. And therefore the crisis in Ukraine. And with all this, I think directly when it comes to economy, we have seen that the competition has reached its highest peak. And it comes in different ways. United States wants to maintain its hegemony, and it wants its companies to lead. And the rise of others, particularly Chinese company, we've seen with Huawei, and it has spread from Huawei, where China is now leading on issues of lithium and lithium batteries, EVs, challenging your traditional players, your traditional car makers. We've seen with solar panel. We've seen quite a number of developments in which United States is trying to roll back China. And
I'm thinking of even social media platforms.
And the rise of your TikTok and the like. And therefore, the old world, as Gransky put it quite clear, it's dying, and the old is not yet born. So we're caught in that in between. That new world order is not yet here. But obviously, the old one, when I say the old, I mean the 1945 world order, where United States have the so-called rule-based world order. And those confusion and issues and competition finds its way on the African continent as the weakest continent, weakest in terms of inability to protect its own and guard its own, inability to penetrate global markets, massive number of people affected by pandemics, climate change, even though it did not pollute the world more, but it's most affected at less than 3-4% in its own role. So these countries cannot engage each other, as the case in the First Cold War. They all battle to have countries be on their side. United States use democracy, liberal order, try to win over African countries. China, being the trading nation number one, also plays the same game, wants countries to understand its own understanding and the need to transform the very same order. And the African voice seemed to be a bit weak. At times it does come through when at United Nations General Assembly, but is not as strong. I think we saw the weakness in 2011 with the Libya bombing. Africa was not united. Others supported an imperialist hegemonic war led by Europe, supported mainly by United States in terms of bombing. And that opened a Pandora box into the crisis we have now in Sahel. Weapons, a state was destroyed literally through bombing. Same case in Iraq, same case in Syria, in Afghanistan. And I think what the continent does not do well is to unite around certain no-go areas, to have a common position on key issues. We're talking about the transformation of the United Nations, reforms of the United Nations. Ensure that in a transformed UN, Africa should have its own position and have permanent members.
Absolutely.
But we don't know who among Africans, which countries will go in. There seem not to be agreement even among Africans themselves.
Sure.
So those are some of the weaknesses where our leaders tend to spend more time planning for 5-year, 10-year plans without a regional, a continental, and strengthen that and have common protocols. How do you respond to the fourth industrial revolution? On issues of digital, the world is going digital. Do we understand the question of digital imperialism? Do we understand that? That all our data, big data that is, does not sit even in a big country like South Africa. We have no control of our data. It's in California. This has huge implication for future generation. We need to ensure that data and data centers are here. We should not allow United States, Europe, or China to have this unlimited access, mining our data. I think the debate is only limited to issues of cybersecurity or personal data. But we don't ask the question that anyone who has access to understand your nation, your military, the mines you have, the patterns of any nation, that data does not sit here. You have to buy that data from the very same people. So we need to rally the continent around these core issues for the better of the next generation.
In closing, what do you see as the biggest opportunities for the continent in the next 5 years?
I think I have trust in the younger generation. I think we see the uprise at times in a disorganized way. I don't support military coups, but the recent noise in West Africa, I agree with the issues that they are putting across, but I do not think we fully understand what are those issues. I think there is that understanding by younger generation. They need less of external interference in our democracy. I think I'm very hopeful that if we manage to unite across borders on the continent and stick to an Afrocentric idea of development and at the same time engage the world. We cannot be an island in a sea of other civilizations all over the world. I think we need to engage fully. We're part of the world, but we need to do it with a clear purpose and direction driven from the continent. We have the papers, Agenda 2063. It's a beautiful vision, but the practice, we tend to have kind of wobbly inability to measure what we are talking about. Infrastructure, we have clear plans, but are we connecting that if we're developing whether bridges, dams, airports, are we speaking at a regional level? Are we speaking at a continental? You don't just develop to showcase, but you do it in an organized fashion. And therefore, I'm very hopeful that there seems to be a younger generation that think in a strategic way, understand the dynamics and the shifting global order, and engage the world. We really need Americans, we need the EU, we need the Chinese, we need the Japanese, but we need to manage them so that they don't spoil or eat our lunch, to use the American language.
Well, Prof Monyae, we thank you for joining us, for sharing your insights with us, particularly at the geopolitical and African level, and helping our audience to understand not only the threats, but also the tremendous economic opportunities that lie ahead for the continent, especially its younger generations. So all the best with your important work, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure being here.
The pleasure was ours. Thank you for joining us. Remember to like, share, subscribe, and comment below, and we'll see you for the next installment of SMWX. Aye.
Wouldn't you like to explore a country where two worlds intersect, where first world infrastructure meets an emerging market, where diversity is celebrated through its people and its sectors, where one of the most powerful economies in Africa embraces new opportunities, where science and technology enjoy rapid advancement, a land where innovation creates a dynamic environment for growth. The world's leader in mining and minerals, with nearly 90% of all the platinum metals on Earth and around 41% of all the world's gold. Where a market of almost 60 million people provide you with the perfect springboard to access a continent of 1.3 billion people. Welcome to South Africa, a land of endless possibilities. A truly inspiring country. Welcome to the future. Invest in South Africa. Powered by Brand South Africa.